There's filmmaking and film criticism. They're two completely separate things, two completely separate categories, and we might even think of one as antagonistic to the other, one as being the opposite of the other. But in fact, when you really think about it a little bit philosophically, film criticism is a positive contribution to the art of filmmaking. Still, two separate things. The guy who makes the film and the guy who evaluates the film, criticizes the film, says how it could have been better, two separate things. Philosophy and the critique of philosophy are not two separate things. It would be slightly absurd for someone to criticize a film critic by complaining, all you do is criticize, why don't you go make your own film? Instead of criticizing this movie that's out in theaters and saying it's so bad. The answer you'd have to give back is, hey, these are two separate things. Filmmaking is a legitimate art form, but what I'm doing as a critic of the film is also legitimate, is also important, is also a positive contribution to filmmaking. It would be utterly absurd and bafflingly stupid to say to someone, why did you write this critique of Kantian philosophy? Or why did you write this critique of Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, whoever the philosopher may be? Why did you write this critique of philosophy instead of writing your own philosophy? The critique of philosophy is philosophy. They're not two separate things. In the act of writing an explanation of what I consider to be wrong with the philosophy of Plato or Immanuel Kant or whatever it is, I am declaring, I am explaining my own philosophy. There aren't two categories here. There's only one. Why would anyone criticize Bernie Sanders instead of declaring their own political philosophy? Why would anyone criticize Donald Trump instead of engaging positively in their own political mission, purpose, party, in the pursuit of politics? Do you see the fallacy at the bottom of this way of thinking? The critique of politics and politics, these are not two separate things. In the act of criticizing Bernie Sanders, you are declaring, you are announcing, you are explaining your own political philosophy. You are articulating what goals you're pursuing in politics and how you think you should reach it, right? You are making a positive contribution to politics, even if a Bernie Sanders supporter perceives your critique as something negative. The act of criticizing Donald Trump is, in itself and of itself, politics. It's not the opposite of politics. See this fallacy of thinking film criticism is something different from filmmaking, right? Criticism of Donald Trump is not something other than politics. It's not even something negative. It's a positive contribution to politics. There are not two categories here. Critique is philosophy. Critique is politics. There are not two antagonistic and opposed categories. I received some criticism from another YouTuber that I found quite laughable and quite stupid and quite counterproductive. And this is the fundamental misapprehension, misconception, or conceit at the basis of his complaints against myself. He complains that my YouTube channel is only a critique of vegan politics, that it's only a critique of what's wrong with the vegan movement, that this channel is not in itself and of itself vegan activism. And he's wrong. The critique of activism is activism. It's the same philosophy. No take two. Keep rolling. It's the same fallacious mode of reasoning again and again and again. I do not feel the need to justify what I do here on YouTube in terms of the outcomes. But the outcomes are interesting. They're interesting to talk about, they're interesting to reflect on, and they're part of how I justify spending time and money on this hobby on YouTube, which is in some ways a success and in some ways a failure. I have reached over 4.6 million views on this YouTube channel. If I were instead to imitate Earthling Ed, if I were instead to imitate James Aspie and stand on a street corner and talk to strangers one by one, there's absolutely no way I could reach 4 million people. There's no way I could reach 1 million people per year. And roughly speaking, this year I'll get about 1 million views on this channel. Could be better, could be only 800,000 if it's a bad year, could be 1.2 million if it's a good year. That's the kind of range we're talking about here, okay? So this is a very simple measure of the extent of the influence, the outcome of the activism in that sense. But there's another really interesting question of depth. We watched a video earlier today of James Aspie talking to a muscular American guy with his shirt off who had no particular respect for James Aspie, no reason why he would. James Aspie was just some weirdo on a street corner talking to him. No particular respect for James Aspie's views, philosophy, his ethics of animal rights, Buddhism, and no reason why he should. This is just a conversation between two strangers in the street, and I think the video was 20 minutes long. I don't know if the unedited conversation was even longer than that, but you could spend 20 minutes talking to 4 million strangers on the street, if you could reach the same numbers this YouTube channel reaches, and you would never have the depth of influence, the degree of a meaningful relationship that I have on this channel with people every day. I had about 3 young men write to me at the same time. This is about 2 weeks ago, so quite recently. About 3 young men wrote to me all at the same time. One of them was 21 years old, and he started watching my YouTube channel when he was 16. I have now been a major formative influence in his life. He's heard me talk about philosophy, he's heard me talk about politics, he's heard me talk about veganism. Another one had been watching the channel for 2 or 3 years, and again, I think his current age is about 20. So again, his late teenage years, when he started to ask himself these questions seriously, he watched my channel, he heard what I had to say about these things, he heard my reasoning. And why did he start watching my channel? Why did he care about what I have to say? It's not because I have a pretty face. It's not. It's not because I'm offering you a weight loss cure, telling you how to do 200 push-ups a day or something, right? In that kid's case, that young man's case now, but he was a kid at the time, he came to my YouTube channel because he liked my interpretation of the writings of George R.R. Martin, science fiction author, fantasy author, right? I have some videos interpreting his short stories and his books, and he said, wow, what you said about this. So he established a kind of intellectual respect for me, or a sense of kinship with me. He respected what I had to say actually about literature, right? And then on that basis, he starts to take an interest in what I have to say about politics, history, how to live a meaningful life. There are other people who have discovered this channel because they were trying to quit video games. They were interested in what I said about video games. There were people who discovered this channel because of what I said about antidepressants, SSRI drugs, mental health, self-improvement, on and on. All right? So as absurd as it may seem, if I were to come on YouTube now and do absolutely nothing but make videos unrelated to veganism, even that could be evaluated as a form of vegan activism with very measurable, life-changing outcomes for the people who are drawn to this channel because they're interested in what I have to say on some completely unrelated topic. And then once they've established this kind of kinship with me, this kind of respect for me, interest in what I have to say and who I am and why, then they become interested. Oh, why did this guy become vegan? What does he have to say about veganism? And there's this long history of videos on this channel, right? And this is without even getting into the examples in the discussion of how really deeply meaningful it is for people who are already vegan, who care about veganism, to connect with and relate to the critique of the vegan movement that's presented in my channel. Now, this guy who criticized my channel at one point, I think he was kind of losing faith in what he had to say himself. He says, in a hyperbolic, over-the-top way, what kind of person even would become vegan because they saw videos on Aizul Mazar's channel, on à-bas-le-ciel channel? Fair question, but I think he was faltering because even as he said that out loud, he could already start to think through the answer, right? Precisely the kind of person who doesn't respond positively to bullshit, half-truths, lies, cult-like recruitment tactics, the kind of person who's quite ornery, independent, free-thinking, critical, the sort of person who is not easily impressed by Earthling Ed. I think some of the hardest people to convert to veganism are precisely the people who are drawn in through my channel. I think some of the people who are the most valuable in terms of what they intellectually can contribute to veganism are the kind of people who respond positively to what's on my channel. You can ask yourself this very simple question. Who wants to hear a bunch of lies about how there's nothing wrong with the vegan movement? And what kind of person is going to respond positively to a down-to-earth, in-depth discussion of what's wrong with the vegan movement, in what ways we're succeeding, but in what ways we're failing, and how we can do better? What kind of personality is that second type of personality? Does that sound like a bad person to you? That sounds like someone you don't want to reach out to? Even if you were doing on-the-street activism, like James Aspey, like Earthling Ed, don't you think that could be a positive, wonderful conversation if you had someone approach you who said, look, I am kind of sort of interested in veganism, but I notice a lot of things wrong with the movement. Some would respond positively to a 100% cult leader-like response, flatly denying that anything's wrong with veganism. How can you say that? What do you mean? There's nothing wrong with our cult. Nothing's gone wrong. Nobody's in prison. Nobody's been accused of terrorism. Nobody's been accused of sexual assault. No, none of these problems you've heard about our cult. No, nobody's complaining about millions of dollars disappearing and being wasted. No, donate more money. Nobody's even questioning where the money goes or what happened to those millions of dollars. Okay, maybe some people would respond positively to that 100% dishonest cult leader approach, right? You can imagine what sort of person that would be. But just take the moment and think honestly, what kind of person would respond positively instead to you saying, yeah, you know what? There's a lot wrong with the movement. You know what? Millions of dollars have been wasted. Millions of dollars have disappeared. There have been sex scandals. There have been corruption scandals. There have been people who went to prison for terrorism. There have been people who talked about violence, and there have been some people who were racist, and so on and so forth. Yeah, all that's true. But you know what? You have to make an ethical commitment. Are you going to keep on making excuses for being an adult human being who gets down on his hands and knees underneath a cow to drink the milk out of its udder? Are you going to pretend that's natural and normal and necessary? Are you going to keep on making excuses for this fundamentally absurd part of our culture, or are you going to challenge it? Are you going to say, hey, I can do better than my own grandparents? And you know what? There's a lot wrong with our movement, but I'm actually willing to examine that. I'm willing to talk about it. And I'm willing to talk to you right now about what could be better 5 years in the future, 20 years in the future, so on and so forth. What kind of person is going to respond positively? Okay? The fundamental misapprehension people are burdened with is that the film critic is the enemy of the filmmaker, and that somehow the creation of film or the creation of philosophy or the creativity that goes on within politics is inimical to the critique of these things. And it's not. The critique of what's wrong with politics is itself a vital, positive contribution to politics. That is part of the way forward for politics. Even if you supported the Republican Party in the United States of America, the critique of what's wrong with the Republican Party would be a tremendously important part of that process, right? The critique of Donald Trump is not just something that's done by his enemies. It's something that's done by his supporters. It's something that's done by his own employees, like his press agent, his public relations staff, and so on and so forth, okay? Critique is not taking a step backwards. It's a step forwards. And I'm here on YouTube doing that alone. And with each and every video I upload, I'm asking, who else wants to take that step forward with me? And if it's not you, then who?